Hi, I'm Sally Cohen. I'm MACP. We're so glad to see you today to go over some foundational knowledge on level design. As we go over today over the Q&A, I want you to think of some questions of the principles of level design, and I want you to ask them in chat first, and then we're going to go over them towards the end. I am your host, Semicolon, and the MACP, and I'm joined by my friend and very special guest, Victor Riddel. Take it away, Vic.
Hey everyone, absolutely epic to be back. Glad to see you all here. So I'm Victor Riddel. I'm a gaming experience designer at Meta, and a lot of you know me. So just the quick overview here. So, the first 20 years of my career, I spent in AAA gaming, working as a creative director and design director, working on PC, console, and handheld. Then the last 10 years, I've been building VR games, and the last 3 of that, I've been making worlds in Horizon. But in that time, I was fortunate enough to work as a level designer in my early career, building single player and full multiplayer level designs. But I had the opportunity later on to work with some of the most wonderful, incredibly talented level designer at Guerrilla Games, who went on to do the Horizon Zero Dawn series, and also at Ubisoft. Okay, so this is the bit where I kind of talk about there is no one amazing kind of design process that you go through that outputs a great game at the end of it. So we tend to think about designers having a toolbox, various principles they would apply through development while building a game. So last time we spoke about gameplay loops, and this time we're going to talk about level design. Level design I would describe as the art of defining, building, and iterating on maps, levels, or missions in order to maintain player engagement. Now, this is so important for a level designer because what they're doing at every step of the way in everything they design, whether it's a 2D game or a sprawling open world adventure, is how do I keep the player interested? How do I stop them from getting frustrated? So professional level designers in the industry tend to focus on gameplay integration, layout pacing, and variety over time, and not necessarily environment art. So that would be, a supporting discipline within the studio. And additionally, they don't really deal with world building. World building is what typically a science fiction writer would do. So creating, backstories and languages and continents and things like that. So what are we going to cover today? We'll cover aesthetics and game design and how they come together. So the relationship between those two things. Some tips on getting started. Now, this is how I approach, a level design process or building a new world. My absolute favorite subject within level design, which is how to direct players effectively. And then just some follow-up notes on, creating memorable and engaging spaces. So we're going to do something a little bit different this time. So there's a little green box, and if you see that pop up, that's your opportunity to jump in chat and have a little think about the question that's being posed on the individual subjects. When we think about aesthetics very early on in level design, what I find is super important is defining not only the tone and the feel of the world that you're building, but also considering the verbs. So that would be, what really is the player doing? What are the kind of actions within the world? It might be exploring as in the world Caldera, or jumping, or summoning, or shooting. Did we get any answers to what people's verbs might be for their current projects?
I was gonna say, for mine, jumping's a big thing. Whenever I'm in a world, I can't just stand still. Like I'm always just jumping around. So whenever I'm in a world, I really like the world that kind of like has almost like a little like just places to bounce around. That's one for me.
And again, I think it's again in the early days of crafting a world, you might think, okay, so if that's one of the primary activities, how do I construct things, in front of the user that naturally suggests this or enhance this? Additionally, I would say really think about how the gameplay activity and the aesthetics complement and enhance each other. So I'll use the example of Horizon Zero Dawn. This is a game very much about crafting and scavenging and stealth and kind of primitive weapon building and stuff. So that team created what I think is one of the perfect examples of how aesthetics and all the gameplay actions really came together, because it's a world that you really, really want to explore, and within it is contained these kind of robotic animals, that encourage stealth and places to hide. Additionally, Resident Evil 4, again, this is a very kind of oppressive feeling that the developer wanted to get through with this game. And again, because it's survival horror, there's very limited ammo pickup, so scavenging is much more part of that experience. Moving on to Fall Guy, again, a wonderful example of how aesthetics and the gameplay actions come together. So it's super goofy, it's fun, it's colorful, it's chaotic, it's vibrant. And the way that the aesthetic in the world helps the user really understand all the opportunities and the readability of that space as they're going through it works wonderfully well. And I'll go on to another game that I'll reference, which is Journey, which is, again, one of I would hold up as a wonderful example of how aesthetics and gameplay action come together, because this is the game about jumping and gliding and discovery and travel and sand surfing and things like that. So everything in the world really, really helps support those gameplay actions. Okay, so just out of my general curiosity, as you as creators, how would you go about deciding an aesthetic for one of your new worlds?
For example, one like the silly ones, like not the silly ones, I guess ones that don't have like a really serious objective, I think are definitely fall into like a more cartoonish aesthetic. Like one of my favorite ones is like Laser Tag by Mavix. There's a scoreboard, there's no rounds, there's no limit. You're just going in there, jumping around, you like jump really high, and you just jump shooting your friends. And I really like the aesthetic there. It's like this mix between like a Toontown-ish and like I just like almost like Fall Guys as well. And then there's other games, right? Like Michael Gregory's like escape rooms, who usually have like a dark aesthetic because you're trying to like escape something. It's more serious. So that's kind of like where you see a lot of the gameplay really mixes well with the aesthetic.
There's some great examples there, and I think someone in chat was saying jumping and exploring, and I think exploring is a really interesting kind of action to task your players with, because again, the way that you construct your world can be immediately inviting in the way that they would immediately start exploring and so on. Okay, visual language. Visual language is something, again, that's maybe obvious to some, but we try and kind of define this with the art team and a larger team, or if you're a solo developer, really thinking about how do I establish something visually that communicates an idea. And I've got some classics there. So we can see in Zelda Breath of the Wild, the classic, and it's been used for decades, this one, the cracked rocks. Important that's consistent there, so you wouldn't necessarily see a similar texture type or presentation of a visual that's suggested from a distance. It might be breakable or it might not. The next one on the top I referenced was Doom 3. So Doom 3 again is a classic. It's it's quite a low saturation world, so it's quite grey. It's very technical, but they have lights on the doors, so as a player, you could kind of step into an environment and you'd see, okay, these two doors are locked, this one's open, this one's locked, and this one's open. So establishing that very clear visual language. Half-Life is the next one. It should be obvious to everyone which barrels can be shot and which are not destructible. In the example of Tomb Raider, having a really clear a visual language around what is climbable and what's not, and you'll even have players in the moment kind of looking, at these routes and almost kind of pre-planning how they're going to traverse that stuff before they do. Down the bottom, another classic is like boarded up doors. This is from Hogwarts Legacy. But again, you can see the consistency. So the brown texturing on the boarding that tells players that this is inaccessible or possibly unbreakable. Players could try this to establish that rule. And on the window, just on the right-hand side, the developer has used exactly the same tone, exactly the same color and construction. So it's really clear to players. And then the all-time classic bottom right, which is Naughty Dog. They almost established yellow as a kind of accepted standard in video games to say, this is probably the way forward. And they use that a lot in the Uncharted games and some of it in The Last of Us, whereby if you see a yellow ledge, it means climbable. If you see a yellow object and another area, you might have to bring one object to another. So very clear, very consistent, established visual language. Okay, so question to the chat. So if you're establishing a visual language in your worlds, how do you know that it's working well or working or not? Anything, Semi?
One of the new ones that was released, Battle for Steel City, I think does a good job. Obviously, they have the giant arrows that shows like where you can climb and stuff, but like it does a good job of like almost makes you want to explore because you look first you get like hit with like the huge like visual like buildings and stuff like that, but then you see like you have different pathways and it's like it makes you want to explore which way you want to go, and then it leads down different paths. And then one thing that they have in there is that underground tunnel. So as you're exploring, then you're like, oh man, what's down there? And they have like these different doors as well, which like it just makes you just want to continue to explore. And I think that what also it does, the vibe in there does contribute a lot to the story. Like, the story is of like the evil robot societies that takes over and stuff. And there's like kind of gloomy and doomy, and it's like a futuristic, almost like prehistoric vibe as well. So I think that game does a really good, as well, does a good job with the aesthetics and then the storytelling and the game design. I think another one that comes to mind is Murder. Murder by Wayne's World. That one, it's really, really creepy in there. I was saying scary. But it does have like hallways, right? And it tells you like it kind of directs you like where you want to go, but then it has like different rooms. So it's like really it's like almost like you get lost in there. So I think that also is another one that does a really good job with the aesthetics and the game design.
Speaking of Wayne's World, so we've got a great comment in the chat. So Wayne's World playtest, and that really is really number one for me. It's, as a designer, you make an assumption. You say, okay, I think players are going to understand that this means one thing and this visual communication means something else. And then you'll have that moment where ideally you'll be doing observational playtesting, where you'll just ask people to go through your world and tell them that, you can ask me questions, but I won't really answer them. Is it okay if I observe how you react to the things that I built in my world? And then just through doing that, you'll say, okay, so they've done the thing that I wanted to do, or they've destroyed the thing that I've communicated that is destructible, or they've gone to the place that I wanted them to. And additionally, we have comments in chat from, Sandwich, absolutely spot on. It's if the player understands it immediately, that's another aspect of visual language that can be super, super helpful. And with the classic examples, you've seen them in games a lot. And I think there's a lot of value in kind of embracing common standards within visual language, but certainly develop your own and have players learn those as they go through. Again, this is just, some things that I do when getting started, planning a world. Partly because I really enjoy this stuff and I really like thinking about, all the different things the world could be and how the art could complement the gameplay. So concept art and reference gathering is always a super fun thing to do, especially because during that phase, it might inspire some ideas for gameplay mechanics that I hadn't thought of prior to doing the reference gathering phase. And of course, with the onset of AI, like getting ideas, just typing stuff in and just generating, I find as a really nice way to kind of prompt creative thought. Pen and paper. Again, I would often kind of just sketch something out just very quickly from a top-down perspective. I think what that helps me do is start to understand the player journey from the entry point to the exit or anywhere where they might leave. But additionally, it really helps with a kind of detail planning, if you like. So I'm going to invest a lot of geometric detail in a certain composition or theme or dynamics within a certain area, so that immediately suggests the other areas from my top-down scribbles where I think, okay, I'm going to spend kind of less effort or attention to those areas because maybe they're transitional areas or things like that. Grey boxing and blockout is always fun. I think what this really helps over and above top-down pen and paper or something like that, would be to start to get a sense of the pacing, just dropping into your gray box and kind of walking through and thinking, okay, what's important? What does the player need to know at this point? And what's important, when they turn the corner, or if I change the environment, it morphs into something else. It's like, how do I get a sense as a creator that I'm delivering really good pacing, but also variety of action? Because again, going back to the ultimate goal of a level designer is for engagement. So if you're not creating the kind of variety over time in a traditional level design sense, then players might decide they want to leave or go somewhere else. We are hugely advantaged, though, in Horizon that we do have people. So anything that you can do to kind of embrace or kind of push people together in your level design or make them have a great time together is super engaging, because people, just being with people in the kind of worlds that you build is really great. Okay, level metrics. This is something we would do. It's maybe more appropriate to certain kinds of games, but I found it super helpful. So I use the example of a parkour game. So building, simple geometry jump markers. So you might have, okay, so this is the distance where if a regular player walk speed, that's an easy jump. And then you kind of make another one. So that's a hard jump. And then you might say, okay, so if they're going at running speed, or the speed that I've set within my spawn point, okay, they're going to probably take this arc. And what you can do is kind of just place these in your gray box and say, oh, I might want this really dramatic moment where if they achieve this jump, that they pass through a small gap or break something or do something like that. Additionally, we would sometimes use door widths, corridor widths. You have considerations for, if there's two players, with personal boundary on, say, for example, they need to be able to pass smoothly, kind of either side. That we can't have people getting blocked. You couldn't have, say, two users blocking another user coming through. So we would kind of standardize, corridor widths and door frames and things like this. And an additional consideration is cross screens camera. So the cross screen camera is a lot higher. So a door that might look great within a standard VR first person experience might not work particularly well for cross screen, because the camera's colliding with objects in that. So just getting a sense of, what are the kind of metrics that I want within this world, and then building kind of these, just little geometry helpers that you can help kind of lay out that will kind of better define, a really great experience. Okay, so we had a question. I'm really interested, really, from the community. When you're starting out on a new world, so how would you go about that? So, do we have anything in chat?
Skinner actually said, put a fun one in there, one that I didn't think of using before, but I probably will now. But I'll just read it off. It says, something fun I've been experimenting with lately is to use AI, not for ideas, but to tease out ideas I might have. Ask me questions to help you understand or summarize this for me and generate an image based on this idea. He says they also enjoyed PureRef, Pinterest, and other social art websites. That's actually a good, the last one is what I use, but I would definitely use the AI one, but to kind of like inspire, like the kind of almost going back to the previous slide, like the aesthetic of like what the level might be, like to get ideas and stuff. That's a good way to start. I know from working with like a lot of creators, especially recently, I'm gonna shout some creators out, like Mike the Guru. I'm not gonna spoil it for you guys, but he's gonna come out with a great world. He starts with gray boxing. The whole world's just gray. But he focuses on the mechanics first. That's what he likes to do. And make sure that at least he has like a level, like just the minimum amount of environment that we could test out the mechanics. And again, he brings in people to test out the mechanics and that and once he gets those down, then he starts with the aesthetic. Another person that does that is Keith Davidson. He actually doesn't do any environment, which whenever I jump in to build with him, I'm like, dude, can we just like get something to shoot, please? It's like, no, I got to get the mechanics first. And on the other end, there's Daydream Davy, who starts with the environment first to get like a really good visual like aid of like how he's gonna want the mechanics to work. And then what I noticed too is like some creators, they start with primitive first. I think Sandwich said that in there right now. He starts with primitive worlds and the gray box, and then he later adds the tri-mesh. He said he looks at assets for and online source for inspiration. But yeah, that's a good way to start with primitive first. Don't get overly complicated, don't like get caught up, of like how's it gonna look just yet. Until like
I
you're ready.
really,
Mhm.
yeah, I really love Miami's comment. Just making testing really simple mechanics, getting that main loop really tuned, something I spoke about in the previous talk, and getting a sense of how that feels, and possibly, I would hope, then thinking about how does the environment and all the things that kind of build on top of that really complement the core activities. Okay, so this is my favorite subject within all of this. This is just different things that I've learned over the years to effectively direct players in your worlds. So we'll start with a scenario, starter zones. So I shared some thoughts last time about starter zones, but I think starter zones is really about embracing a very kind of wide range of people and really thinking about what do I want them to know when. So not overwhelming them with lots of information, settling them into that world because they've just arrived. It's a new world, and VR can be very overwhelming for a lot of users. And then just kind of, easing them forward, whether it's you're changing the world or actually getting them to walk. Establishing shots, again, I'll use the example. This is Wind Waker, which is a wonderful, wonderful game. So I think they did pathing and establishing shots and the starter zone just so well in this game. So for those of you that played it, you might remember you start very high up on this kind of a perch on a jetty out at sea. And things are it's made aware of you kind of what's important within this world. But then you get to gameplay and you're looking really over this island and immediately the most important things are the two houses on the right. Yeah. And you're encouraged to go and visit the furthest one on the right. But straight away you can see, the path leading over to the bridge to the left, the pathing is so clear. It's just immediate and you just get going and you just get started, and they'll kind of ease you into the pieces of information that you need to know as you travel, your first 5 minutes experience. So I did have a question, which would be to our creators: when would you not want clear pathing, not only in your starter zone, but also throughout? For me, a great example of that again is Michael Gregory's escape rooms. Like the whole point, right, is to escape. You don't want a clear path. So that's like a good example of a gameplay loop where you don't want to. You don't want it. You don't want it to be as intuitive as like a game with like that has a clear objective. Another one, which is like worlds that have like the one core gameplay loop, right? But it's like you can do it however you want. Is Fairies in the Trees by Space Clear Unicorn. Like you jump around. You jump around, you hang out with friends, you jump around. There's no clear path of how you're supposed to jump around. You just jump around and have fun. So those two that come to mind. Yeah. And again, just going to chat, if I didn't want to go to players to go there from Bubblegum, absolutely. If you want to keep players away from that area and really highlight what's important. Pushing exploration, yeah, it might be that the world experience that you're trying to build is much more about discovery and intrigue and surprise. So you might not necessarily want that. Sandbox is another one. If it's all laid out in front of me and I just go crazy, that could be one thing. And PvP or free play again. This is all great. So for me, a really obvious example would be when you want the player to feel like tension or anxiety. You might be making a horror experience where at one point you really want them to feel lost. I would also reference there's some really great Call of Duty levels whereby it's really not clear where you go. You want to feel they wanted the player to feel under pressure and the chaos ensuing around them. So pathing them through these kind of really small broken buildings and tight areas where they were being attacked from above and things were jumping out and stuff. So there's certainly, while clear pathing is good for directing players, there's certainly lots and lots of examples where you wouldn't want clear pathing in your world. Okay, landmarks and sidelines. So again, it's quite obvious, but I really enjoy this as a level design technique. So whether it's been foreshadowed through story, whatever, just having tool objects or, you know, it could even be in a small space, a kind of a dominant object to help players kind of with their spatial orientation. So you might be, you know, exploring a world and you've got a consistent position, you know, that's depicted by a tool structure. I'll use the example of, you know, Halo Infinite, or one of the Uncharted games where they use this technique a lot, not only as a way to drive players towards what's important, but also create intrigue. But it's mainly about spatial orientation, because I think, again, that's one of the things with players. If they start to feel lost, they can sometimes, you know, if that's not the intention of the experience, they can start to feel frustrated, and that might cause them to leave your world. And giving, actually planning clear sightlines to this. And I've seen some wonderful VR chat worlds built some years ago, which really delve into sightlines, whereby when the creator would map this stuff out in gray box, they would say, okay, so here's the important hangout spots, you know, here's the bar, here's the dance area, here's that. But what I wanted, and they just put these elongated rectangles in the world, you know, in their gray box, and say, I want a clear line of sight here, I want a clear line of sight here, and a clear line of sight here. And then they built these beautiful kind of rock structures and overhanging trees and things like this. And it just worked beautifully. So when I was at any one of the kind of themed hangout spots within the world, I had a clear line of sight to people in the other areas. So it's just really beautifully planned out. If I can remember the name of that world, I'll drop it in chat later. Okay, just a bit of a fun question, this one. So which company pioneered these techniques back in 1955? The concept of landmarking and sightlines. Yeah, there we go. Okay, Jessica, wonderful. Yeah, Disney. So Disney theme park design, you know, in the games industry, we took a lot of this learning. So, you know, if you've been to the theme park, you get it. You turn a corner and it might be a beautiful archway, a perfect sight line to, you know, some activities, and in the background, or, you know, in that composition, there will be a landmark. And they also used a concept of berming as well. So whenever you were in any particular themed area within Disney Park, you wouldn't be able to see any of the other themed areas. So they called it berming. We just call it kind of level extents or occluders in level design. So clear line of sight and yeah, kind of stuff. Okay, attractors. So within your worlds, you as creators are going to be, you know, devising things that, okay, so these are things that are important to me. I want players to be attracted. I want them to be drawn to these things and engage in the activities, right? And, you know, there's various different visual techniques that you can employ to this. And I think the shrines in Breath of the Wild are a great example. You know, as soon as you see a shrine, if you've played that game, you want to go and check it out. You want to go and learn more. And as you kind of play more of the game, the visual language in that world is absolutely fantastic. You know, I've got a really good sense of where all the landmarks are. The planned sight lines in that game are just some of the best that you can experience again. But within all of that, there's so much visual information. Just having a sense of, you know, the state of these objects and where they are in the world. So I did have a question, because there's a lot more that you can do, attracting players to things in your world. So the question was, what other techniques would you use to attract players to important elements within your world? If only we had that draw distance. It's true. It's true. But we work with what we've got. Okay, King of Miami, absolutely. So sound, and especially in VR. So spatial sound, you know, as a player's moving through your world, and you might have a number of things that you want them to interact with. So having spatial sound firing off, it could, you know, even be at distance with a fall off or on a trigger when they're at a certain point in the world, is a wonderful way to kind of draw people's attention. Mike the Guru, spot on. So lighting, you know, and again, it's a classic technique we use in game development, where you might be in a scene and there's a doorway, but there's a light over it. And why is that the only one with a light over it? Of course, because players, much like moths, are drawn towards lighting. Similarly, it could be contrast. So, you could have a low contrast environment with a high contrast element within it. Additionally, it could be lit. Saturation. So there could be brighter colors within this object that you've built in the world, and it kind of stands out, against everything else. There's a great example from Firewatch, which is a wonderful narrative first-person game. The notice boards within the world of Firewatch were brilliant attractors. As soon as you saw one from distance, you would go and find out, what was on that. Sandwich, perfect movement. So just having some kind of movement, it could be the object, it could be animating, it could be a visual effect, but using a number of these techniques can always be successful. But there's something we did at Ubisoft that I'll share, which we did the concept of premium attractors, where we would just use everything. So we would say, okay, so this is, it might be Litmer, it's more higher contrast, there's some movement there, maybe some accompanying visual effects to kind of really draw the player's attention. But the team there took it to a next level. So they create an intriguing scenario. So it might be a woman who was kind of at a cart or something, and something was broken, and she was distressed. So kind of seeing these things, and in playtesting, we would see the vast majority of playtest candidates would just go in the direction that we wanted. So
a really good example, or it gets not even like not just for levels, but like a lot of hangout worlds. I think somebody in there said, what was it, like color and like lights, as Dom says light, sounds, and visual animations. That works really well in hangout worlds. Like for example, Binksy Binks in Midnight Oasis, and I know the my intercession, she has an Afro hub I went to recently. Like the fires work really well. You can see them at a distance, like at the fire pits and stuff. So it does kind of like almost guide you down like where kind of you want to go, and along the path there. Then you kind of end up seeing like almost like little activities that can stop along the way. But it's not like water pong or like quick little I know Binksy has like Connect Four, but I think like definitely for sure like fires work really well to kind of show you where you want people to gather in hangout worlds, because that becomes a little bit difficult to do
yes.
where like it's not a level.
It's very primal instinct for us as humans to
Mhm.
kind of walk towards the fire pits and stuff. So yeah, it's almost like it should be a rule. All hangout worlds have a fire pit.
Yeah, yeah.
Leading line. So this is again a fascinating technique. So leading lines, it's a principle of photography. So a lot of photographers would use, to draw focus to an element within the photograph, they would have kind of lines which would naturally occur in the world. So this is a great talk that David Shaver gave about level design in it, and he was saying, okay, so if you want to draw people in a direction, think about how lines kind of naturally kind of do that. And force movement or encourage exploration. So it could be there's pipes on the ceiling, it could be a path, or as we can see here, a kind of just a detail on the floor. But in this example he gave, there's the corridor that you see at the top, there's a 50% chance the player's going to go right or left in this scenario. So you can do additional work in this kind of leader line technique to encourage additional, action, like the player turning right. So in the bottom example that he gave is the pipes on the right-hand wall, the left-hand wall, they stop short, and the ones on the right, they continue around the corner. And we've got this little kind of gray box, cable, whatever, and that kind of turns round to the right. And then there's this simple geometry on the left with the cones is a visual element that would discourage that kind of movement. So I did have, because we would do this a lot in the Assassin's Creed games actually, what could you use to create leading lines in an exterior environment?
Again, like back to Anarchy Station, not the bake. There's two tasks that use leading lines. One is like a literal, when you're, I think, charging the battery, there's a line on the floor, just like the picture there, that's red, that tells you which room to go charge the battery. And there's another one you have to like run, it's like a baton, you have to run around the entire like the whole station, the entire world. It does two of them. There's an arrow that points you in the direction you're supposed to go, but then it also has like these like checkpoints that you got to the right place. And the third one that I just thought of was in Battle for Steel City. When you go deliver some food, there's a pink arrow that kind of guides you, kind of where you're supposed to go. And I kind of like those where it's like a guiding line, but it's not very clear. You still have to kind of like figure that one out. So those are like really good examples.
That's great. You know, the bouncing glowing arrow is almost like a joke we used to have in level design back in game dev, whereas you would build an environment and then you would test it with players and you're like, they're just going in the wrong direction. They're not doing what we want them to. So then you would kind of build in some leader lines or apply some lighting to highlight what's important. And then they still wouldn't quite get it. And then you'd end up through a few iterations having this huge glowing arrow bouncing up and down, pointing at the box that you wanted them to explore. So I'm just going to go to chat. So Jessica mentioned logs. Absolutely. And this technique has been used in the Uncharted games, I'm sure. Whereas, you know, there might be a building. So it would have the classic visual language of one window was boarded up, you know, and another window was open. But just to kind of really help guide the player subconsciously, they would lay out some logs. So it would look natural. It was an exterior scene. There would be trees and things like that. But there was something that was kind of drawing the eye or highlighting the importance of the open window versus the boarded up one versus the other kind of non-interactive detail on that housing structure. Streams, terrain, yeah, rivers, paths, you know, natural gorges, the construction of the, you know, the landmass or the rock or whatever. So again, it's something that's nice to consider. You know, you wouldn't want to go too far with it, but it can really help when you're seeing in playtests the players just aren't necessarily paying attention to the things that you want them to pay attention to. So it's a subtle technique, but I think it's a really great one as well. Oh, okay. I love these. I love a lot of this stuff, but so framing, pinching, and reveals. I used a screenshot from BioShock Infinite because I think this is a wonderful one that takes in a lot of these concepts. So framing, again, it's the archway at Disney parks. It's the really, you might as a creator want to highlight the importance of something visual in your world, but if you really want to amplify that, you know, having them, you know, arrive in a scenario, whether it's your landing zone or at the top of some steps or whatever, where you've got these kind of beautifully constructed frame. It could be natural form, like the exit of a cave or something like that, but just really throwing the importance on the object that's kind of staged within that framing. Pinching is a technique more appropriate to, I think, you know, exploratory games or action adventures. But it's whereby you might want to kind of funnel the journey of your player a little bit tighter so you can much better control the next thing that they see. In level design, we call that pinching. And reveals would be the thing that, you know, in Assassin's Creed, we would have the player walk around a cliff top, you know, ledge, a cliff top path rather, just so we could control the gradual reveal of the city as you arrived in a new location in Assassin's Creed. And I've used one of my favorite reveals, which is the original God of War on PlayStation 2. And I think this was the Ares reveal. So you can hear all this thunderous chaos in the background. And then they would kind of have you, you know, climb the stairs. And as you climb the stairs, there was this 100-meter tall kind of god just wreaking havoc on the landscape. And you would see more and more and more of it. So again, it was just one of those wonderfully kind of staged reveals. Okay, environmental storytelling is just another thing that if you want that kind of level of detail in your world, I think it's always helps, you know, create a much kind of richer, more interesting experience for the players who kind of care about that stuff. I use the example of Portal because this is always one of the best examples of environmental storytelling for me, where it's kind of the story behind the story, if you like. So, you know, just staging things in a way that help people kind of see the richer history of the world and the things that have gone on before, you know, before you're in there doing your thing. I think BioShock did this wonderfully well as well. So they went really big on environmental storytelling, where you would be walking through a space and you would see, oh, there's an abandoned meal here. you know, or you know, this area is flooded or whatever. So it will kind of help you kind of understand what had happened before the moment that you were in. Foreshadowing is another technique we would use to, you know, to really motivate players for what was next. So there's a great example in Dead Space where, you know, you could see it's a scary horror game. It's actually too scary for me. I couldn't finish this game. I got too freaked out by it. But you know, just seeing that classic scene of devastation, you know, where something horrible has happened here. But you know, scrawling on the wall actually gave you a gameplay tip for what you were going to encounter next, because Isaac, if you played that game, had this kind of special weapon which you could rotate on different planes and stuff. So you could affect that. Okay, so just some closing thoughts on creating memorable and engaging spaces. And again, this is just works for me. So, you know, a degree of preparation, you know, the work that you do to give you a sense of where you should apply your energy as a creator, where you're going to focus on your kind of your big moments versus, you know, the other things. But it really helps you understand, you know, how am I going to tune the pacing of this experience? You know, how am I going to create enough variety to keep players interested, you know, as they stay in this world, or they, you know, they go through the experience. Directing your players well. Again, it's a subject that I love, but and again, it's quite obvious. But I think it's important to maintain consistency within that. So if you're directing your players in one way, just keep building on that. Striving for harmony between the function and the aesthetic. So function, you know, it's your gameplay, it's your loops, it's things that players are doing, and the real kind of memorable standout games that I've played, you know, over the years have this like wonderful harmony between not only the aesthetic of the world and the visual language, but also it's kind of more than that. And it's probably worth saying that when I think about or talk about aesthetic, I don't just mean the art style, because it's much more than that when you're considering the aesthetic for your world. So it's the you know, your music choice, the sound design that you do in the world, the tone of the writing, the presentation of that writing, you know, the style of the visual effects, the lighting, the art style. That's your aesthetic. It's all of those elements in working really well together to be cohesive alongside, okay, what are the actions the players are doing, and are they really complementing each other? And lastly, just embracing player agency. So one thing we learned in level design is players don't like to be just pushed down a corridor and sent on a linear path. So, you know, as level design as a craft developed, we started to think about the illusion of choice and player agency and autonomy, and giving them, you know, directing them to something compelling. You know, if you go through this experience, you're going to have this great reward, or you're going to reach this thing you really want to reach. But allowing them to kind of do it their way. So that, you know, in Assassin's Creed, there might have been a stealthy, super stealthy way of doing something. There might have been a run and gun way of doing something, you know, the obvious path for that, or there might be something in between, or something, a high vantage point to make it more tactical. So that's, I think contemporary level design is much more about player agency. And I did include an image of Halo Infinite, because again, that's just a classic example of the illusion of choice. You know, there will be a pinch point after this environment where the level designers will bring you back to you know, control the experience a little bit more. But it's immediately suggested, you know, I can go this kind of more stealthy route around to the side. So just thinking about for those types of games. And Burnout, I was lucky enough to work in the same studio as the Burnout Paradise team. And this example here is doing a lot of the things that I was talking about. So I think the visual language of the big yellow gate on the left-hand side. So players would immediately make that decision. Do I want to smash through that gate and take that alternate route, which is higher risk? So there's more opportunity for me to crash. You know, but I'm gonna get there quicker and stuff. So I think, and again, the aesthetic of this game. So even the texturing on the floor is very high contrast to amplify the sense of speed, because one of the most important elements for that team when building that game was sensation of speed. So, the art style really did complement one of the core activities for player, which is I just want to feel like I'm going insanely fast through this world. And the readability, the yellow lines in the middle of the road, they're ridiculous. You don't see that in the world. They're huge. They're literally like, half a meter wide, those stripes. But it was to maintain a good visual language, real clear communication. And of course, the split route is just another very simple but great example of embracing player autonomy. Let them do the thing that they want to do and stuff. So there is that. That concludes our level design talk.
Thank you so much, Vic. We did ask questions throughout, the talk, but if anybody has like any other questions now too about level design, that'd be great. I do have a question as well. Everybody else kind of types them into chat. I want to go back to that World Anarchy station I was saying, where like it's a combination of both a path but not a path. How does that? Is there like a label for that or something, Vic? Where like is a path to multiple things, but there's no path of how or when or what order you do those things. I guess it's like more like if you have a world where it's like it's almost there, you have autonomy, right? There's a path to like doing certain tasks, but there's no path of like how to do them or like when to do them or what order to do them.
Yeah, I think sandbox worlds are the perfect example of player autonomy. You're really just, okay, here's all the stuff you can do. Go and just make your mind up what you do when and stuff. So those worlds, they're establishing your shot, as I talked about earlier, is important. And it's clear, it should be clear to players, if I go over there, or I hit stuff, or I go over here, or I can jump on stuff, or et cetera, et cetera. But you wouldn't necessarily need, in level design, clear pathing to kind of direct players through that environment, because it's all just very obvious and immediate. And games where, in a static environment, it might be one of the, drop pad games where you're all standing on some pads and they're falling away one by one. Then it's not appropriate to really be thinking about guiding players through the environment. Just have a nice visual language to say this is about to break. Whether it kind of wiggles or it has a certain look to it, or it changes color before it drops away.
How do you recommend level design to tackle mobile and VR simultaneously? And I think I know what he means, because like the mechanics are different.
Okay, so if as a creator that you want to pursue a world that is equally compelling on mobile as in VR, number one, you cannot have any simultaneous two-handed interactions. So if you're required, or even space limited, requiring players to kind of reach out or pull something or throw something or catch something, all of these things are very, very don't translate well to the current state of cross screens, right? The camera is an additional consideration. So as I mentioned earlier, consider, if I'm on cross screens and I'm moving around an environment, whether it's a hangout or a game or, parkour especially, is the camera, because it's positioned above the player, is it colliding with anything? Is it causing, it to jump kind of in and out and create, an unwelcome experience? Simplistic interactions, because let's be honest, like moving around on a cross screens version is not as easy as it would be on touchscreen as it is mouse and keyboard or using the controllers on the VR headset. With the VR headset. So I think there are definitely some considerations. But I think think about simplicity. Just moving around and like carrying an object and like dropping it somewhere, or just pressing a switch or something. Just having a good sense of it can be compelling with simple interactions and simple actions for the player on cross screen, and be very wary of the layout of the world, like getting stuck on corners or going through slim gaps might be difficult for a touchscreen player.
What are some common mistakes that new designers make and how to avoid them?
That's a great question, Skita. I I think the first one is obvious. It's like not establishing your gameplay loop and being confident as a creator that your primary or secondary gameplay loop are compelling. Yeah. So you might start just building everything at once. And this is a common mistake I think we make in early game development and level design, whereby you just everything happens at the same time. And I think having a really good sense of, what the player does, the variety within that, and then kind of how the world kind of complements that, as I've been saying a lot. So like at least having confidence, or I wouldn't necessarily see nailing your gameplay loops, but having confidence that they are going to be compelling, and you can create variety with those loops over time before you go and build everything else. Over ambition, I think, is another one that early game makers and level designers suffer from. Their first project is a MMO, RTS, open world FPS with sports games and things like this. I think it's always better to build something small, get it out there, get people playing, get a sense of what they like about it, what they don't, and then build on that. And this is something actually the Burnout team did with Burnout 1. There wasn't many features. It was just built on the principle of if I take risks, I go faster. And then they built on Burnout 2. Burnout 3 was a huge hit with that. So there's another great example of to build a few really high quality features, get a sense of what players love about it, what their feedback is, and then build up from that with subsequent projects. And the last thing I would say would be as a game maker or an experience or a hangout builder or whatever, just in terms of testing, assume that as a designer or a creator that you are wrong. Because I think what I've seen a lot of young developers go and do, or early developers in their career, is they'll build something, they'll be convinced it's great because they and their friends love it, and then they play test it, and then they'll say, oh, well, these people are just wrong, or it's not their kind of game, or whatever. But I think one of the big things for me, the big learnings was, as a game creator, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to build something, put it into a test scenario, look at your playtest participants and say, this is awful. I've made all the wrong choices here. So, just what is it? A designer friend said to me, a designer reserves the right to be wrong in anything they do. And I think that's, again, it's an important one. So nail your gameplay loops, don't be over ambitious, and it's okay to be wrong in your game design decisions.
You give great examples of like 2D games. Meta Jordan asks, are there any principles of level design that don't translate to VR? And on the other side, perhaps matter even more with this new
Great
medium?
question. That's Jorgen. Love that one. I think it's framing. So this is the thing. When I was working on flat screen games, is we could place the player in a scenario where we had a really good sense of what the camera could see. So we could frame these beautiful compositions, and you say, okay, a third-person game, there's the camera behind the player, and you see the beautiful mountain on your left and all this intriguing village on the right. In virtual reality, you don't have control over the framing. So you can't necessarily guarantee, what the player will experience at moment to moment as they progress through, the experience. Of course, the things that I talked about framing and pinching and reveals, they can really help with that scenario in VR. Yeah, it's a player could land in your world and be turned around in their chair and be facing the wall and stuff, and then suddenly, you don't know kind of where they're looking, and that's when I talk about attractors, using sound to kind of direct their attention is kind of really important. And cutscenes is the other one. So in traditional 2D gaming, flat screen gaming, we could just go to a cinematic and we could tell a bit of an emotive story or something like that. But your storytelling in VR is very much in the world, and at some point, we'll be building interesting characters at some point in the future in Horizon, and they can really help with that. And I would use the example of Half-Life Alyx as the best in class for VR storytelling. I think the way that those characters are staged in relation to the position of the player and the way that those pieces of story play out are probably the best example I've seen in VR.
what are some methods that you use that are your go-tos when designing pathways in the large maps in games?
I think it would be what are the beats? So from a top-down level point perspective, if I was to push a user through a world, I'd say, okay, at this point, kind of my major beats are I want them to learn about the world, or I want them to kind of follow something through that path, or I want them to have a reveal, as they turn this corner. I want to send them down into a tunnel. So when they come up, they discover something new. I want to create intrigue, or whatever. So I think it's just getting to a sense of, okay, just with a standard user flow, okay, these are the things I want them to experience. These are the emotions, or the kind of more detailed descriptions of the things I want them to experience. And then just kind of blocking that stuff out in gray box and trying to get to a point where I could test it with people and confirm whether I was right or wrong.
Some video games have cinematic openings to get people into the vibe of the game, but how would you approach this with the limitations within Horizon Worlds?
VO. Absolutely. VO. I think VO is your friend in on the platform currently, because presenting a complex animated character to do the kind of storytelling I was talking about earlier is very expensive. It's not impossible, but that can be done. VO is you get a ton of value out of well recorded, well presented VO to tell story in your worlds. It could be, could be a speaker on the wall that's communicating with you. It could be a headset that players put on. It could be, someone behind a kiosk in the world. It could be a television screen with static on it. It could be this disembodied voice in the air that's just, you're in a calmer moment on boarding, and it's just, telling you the story of what's happened before you've gone there and stuff. So I think you can get a huge amount of value, not only from VO that you record yourself as creators, but there are services out there where you can get professionally recorded VO at a very high standard, very cheaply in comparison to the other art assets that we would purchase to put in games.
So Mavis is asking, what do you recommend us to do when it comes to investing in growth as a game designer?
I think, yes, you could watch a lot of GDC talks. Yes, you could read a lot of books on the kind of principles of design outside of, games, like product design or whatever, as I talked about last time. You could read books about game design. But I think the growth of where I've seen designers on my teams grow more is just by building things, whether it be the project that I'm working on in the studio or building their own personal projects, in their free time. It's just building stuff and getting people to play it. And I think you'll learn so much from failing early and just doing it again and doing it again. And I would almost say to any junior designer, the first game that you build won't be very good, but it'll set you up well to do it again and do it again. And every time you do it, if you maintain the focus and creativity and passion and all of the great things about, a wonderful creative community, you will, without doubt, just get better and better and better. So just make stuff.
Thank you so much, everybody who came. Great questions. Appreciate the interactivity, Vic. Another good one. Thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, thanks everyone. Oh, I've disappeared off screen. But anyway, super happy to do these. I love talking to the community about this stuff, and I'll try and jump in the chat and answer some of those questions if I'm able. But thanks for coming, and hope to do more of these.
Hey, everyone.